At this time, please join me in welcoming United States Congressman Brett Guthrie.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. I think Jeff just gave my speech. So we can break out. I'll do something a little more generic than specific to that. But it's funny, the issues that you get to work with in Washington, D.C., you don't know, when you run for office, you really don't know what you're going to be addressing. You lay out your platform, you say the things you're for or whatever, and then all of a sudden, now you got to say, I'm dealing with black buzzards. But I never ran around my district going, you send me to Washington, I'm going to fix your black buzzard problem. But I am dedicated to fixing your black buzzard problem, so we work together. So funny, you never know. Talking about the last session of the General Assembly, I did a good job with that tobacco settlement money. When I first won my first election, I won by 130 votes out of 27,000 cast. I see some Logan County friends and my Warren County friends over here, and Roger Thomas came to me one day when the first session I was there, and he goes, "Are you part of the 50% club?" And I said, "Roger, I won by 50.3%. He says, "No, I mean the 50% club in the ag settlement bill." So I did. I was always dedicated to that. I thought it was important and seen some great things that have happened with that. But now in Washington, and I guess I want to talk to you about the tone to expect in Washington over the next couple of years, kind of what I hope it will be, maybe what I think it will be. When I first ran, I remember the first time somebody mentioned that I came to me, and I was kind of involved. I was involved in business and so forth, but not so much politics, and thought I'd be a good candidate for the state senate. Dr. Kofoglis, who's a Warren County, and decided not to run again for re-election. And I thought about it. So you just don't run for office to be in office. So I'm really believed you sit down and write your platform and the things you want to do. And I always believed in kind of a mission statement. And I stole it. And I stole it from a song some of you may know, an old church song. And the hope in this song is a hope far better than the one I'm going to talk about. But I thought it was a great line. It was a song called Common Love, and it's a common hope for tomorrow. And that was kind of my theme, common hope for tomorrow. And think about that. It unites all of us. No matter who you are, no matter the color of your skin, the accent with which you speak, your gender, your station in life, you want your kids to have a better life. And that's what's always defined us as being Americans, is that we'll work hard and put up so the next generation will have a better life. And that's certainly true in my family. And when politics becomes, in some instances, let's find this demographic group and find something that fits them, this demographic group and find something that fits them, and try to put a coalition of groups just based on what you promise, it doesn't uplift, and it doesn't bring us together as a country. And a friend of mine just ran a race in Colorado. His name is Corey Gardner. You'll hear a lot about him because he's as good as if you've heard about him, he's as good as you've heard about. And he run a race where a guy was just trying to run him down to different groups. And he says, I'm just going to be happy. And he has this great smiling face. And I'm going to go out and just be the happy warrior, if you remember that term from way back. And he won a U.S. Senate race. Nobody thought he could win going in. And so hopefully we can change the tone of politics and the way that we move forward, because hopefully I try to be that way as well. But as we go into the next 2 years, it's difficult, and I have my friends from Logan County and Warren here that when I first started, and I know some of those guys sitting at the table just over here, we don't have the same party affiliation, but I can guarantee you we have 9 times out of 10 the same belief, values, and policy. But it's a lot different in Washington. It's just people from different perspectives. And the best way to describe it, and this is a true story, a friend of mine named Kevin McCarthy is the Senate Majority Leader. And he was at that time the assistant whip, or the whip. And they all got invited to the White House after the 2010 elections when we first took control of the House. And they had a discussion. He says the thing that was just amazing to me was President Obama said to Kevin, or to the group, and he said, kind of my view of the world is the world's a pie. And it's my job to make sure people get as equal a piece of the pie as they can get. And Kevin said, our view of the world is that we need to make more pies. We need to have policies where people make more pies. Because think about it, I've came from a big family. If there was one pie on the table, we argued over who got what piece. But if there were more pies coming forward, you move forward. And so I kind of wonder, ever since Kevin told me that, and he didn't know the answers, was the president saying his view of the world is just a pie? Or his view of America that we can't make any more pies? And that's incredibly, two different views, but I'm not sure exactly what this difference is. Because think about it, if you think the world's a pie and it's your job to divide it and give it up equally, you think our system's inherently unfair. You think our system's inherently unfair. And all of us here, I think all of us in the room think our system's not inherently unfair. My grandfather, he was born in the 1920, and I will guarantee you that there was roads and electricity in the world in 1920, or cars and electricity in the world in 1920, but not in his world. My grandfather literally the log cabin, horse and buggies. He used to tell me stories of driving horse and buggies to drive the cattle to marketplace. And then right before he died, the last time I saw him where I could talk to him, he took me back to his room to see his big screen he bought so he could read my emails because he was losing his eyesight. And he lived to be 90 years old. Think about that, 90 years old. But think about in the text of human history, he lived over 1/3 of the history of the United States. Think about over 1/3 of the history of the United States. The United States, our founding fathers, I'm reading the John Adams by McCullough now, but our founding fathers lived more like people in biblical times, 2,000 years previously, than they do they couldn't even comprehend how we lived. It took 3 months to get a message back and forth when they were trying to settle the Revolutionary War. John Adams took 3 months to get a message back and forth across the river, across the ocean. I mean, it's just phenomenal. It took 2,000 years for us to put into place what we have that's created the wealth, not just for us, but for the entire world. And my point is, hopefully over the next 2 years, there are things we can do if we can work together. But if we're dealing with someone who thinks, well, everything I'm going to talk about is just inherently unfair to people, then it's going to be difficult to make these things happen. But America can continue, because I'm optimistic about it, to be that great driver of economic wealth and growth. And there's certain areas we need to do. One is taxes. We have the highest tax rate, corporate tax rate in the world, the highest in the world right now. People are moving businesses. You heard about Warren Buffett buying Burger King and trying to move it overseas, and they bought Timothy Hortons in Canada because Canada was going to be a cheaper tax haven than the United States. People are moving stuff to Europe because it's a cheaper tax haven than the United States. And what we want to do is reform the tax rates, and the president will say, well, I've never known anybody that didn't go to work because they had to pay taxes or quit trying to make money because they have to pay taxes. You've heard him say that. Well, people still go to work and pay taxes, just figure out how to pay them elsewhere. And the people who are most affected by it are the people in the middle class and the upper middle class who don't have the ability to move their money around. And does taxes change behavior? I know a lot of you probably go to Gatlinburg. Go to Smoky Mountain Park. Smoky Mountain Park's kind of the same kind of deal that they do in Mammoth Cave where they moved a lot of people out. Well, now there's a little area they're trying to recreate an 80s or 90s farm community so people can see what it looked like before they moved everybody out. And if you go there, there's a thing called a cantilever barn. Cantilever barn is a barn built on stilts, essentially, so everything's on the second floor. And I was there with the park ranger in the park. I said, wow, that's pretty neat. And he goes, why do you think that's on stilts? Why do you think that's a cantilever barn? And I said, and I'm trying to think of every farming reason they would build a barn on stilts. It's not easy to build a barn on stilts. Put the hay in there, it dries out quicker. The cows can go under it. Well, I went through everything. And he says, no, the General Assembly of Tennessee passed a law that they're going to tax the square footage to the first floor of your barn. So those great mountain Tennesseans who are independent said, all right, you're going to tax my first floor, I just won't have one. So tax policy changes behavior. And think about what it does for you guys, what Senator McConnell did in the section just before. Is there anything more about redistributing the pie than the inheritance tax? Think about the average Kentucky farm would pay over $150,000 under the old inheritance tax system. The average Kentucky farmer. When their children took over their family farm, they have to write a check of about $150,000 if the math that I had is correct. Now you get almost a $10 million, depends on how you do it, but up to a $10 million exemption so most family farms can pass down. And that take a fight in the General Assembly or in the Congress to make sure you could have your family farm and move forward. So we need to reform taxes. The other one is our energy. I've always said, and I said, if once we allow the development of the energy, the price of oil in the world should be $65 a barrel. That's how much it takes to get it out of the ground. We have enough to influence the price of oil now. It's all been entrepreneurs, it's all been individuals. Just think if we opened federal lands, if we did the Keystone Pipeline. Well, the president says, well, the Keystone Pipeline, all the oil would just come to the United States and go into the world market. But if you lower the world price of oil, it's cheaper for everybody. Saudi Arabia can't influence the price of oil now because of what we're doing in North Dakota. Look what's happened over the last 3 months. It's not been some grand design of the government, I can tell you that. It's a handful of people who figured out technology to get oil out of the ground in an environmentally safe way. And if the EPA would get out of the way and let us develop, we would export natural gas, change the dynamic in Europe, put Putin essentially out of business, and have it cheaper for all of us here. And we can't get people to do it in the State Department because they say, well, I understand all that, but we really think it should be wind and solar. That's what they say. I've had them say that. And so it's a frustrating, but that's one of the energy policies. The other thing we need to work on, we have to reform entitlements. I know I'm going a little long, so I'm not going to go too much longer on this. Demographically, I'm the end of the baby boom, born in 1964. I'm 50 years old as of this year. In 2029, I'll turn 65. In 2030, the Medicare system in its current program goes bankrupt. So I do town hall meetings and people say, well, you voted for the Republican budget that reformed Medicare. Well, if you're over 55, it didn't change it for you. I don't think anybody's over 55 here. But if you are, it doesn't change anything for you. But think about that. If we don't change it, you're not going to have it. So if you're 70 years old today and you're going to be 85, and hopefully you're going to still be alive, we're living longer, Medicare is going to be bankrupt on it. What if you're 60? It's going to go when you're 75. And the longer we wait to fix it, the more expensive it's going to be to fix. It's nobody's fault. It's not a Republican or Democrat's fault that people came back from World War II and had a lot of children. 1946 to 1964, I'm the end of it. We're all moving through the system, and we have to reform. We're going to push again to reform. I don't think it'll happen under the president, but I think that would be he has kids the same age as my kids. What a great legacy to his children to say, we're not going to continue to pile $17 trillion worth of debt on top of you. Because our deficit's down to below $500 billion. Boy, it's hard to believe that's today that's actually a positive thing, that it's just about $500 billion. But it was over $1 trillion the first couple of years I was there. Well, it goes back to $1 trillion in the end of this decade because of all the baby boomers retiring. So that's something we have to do, and we're going to push forward. People say that's the third rail of politics. Nobody wants to address it. We have addressed it in the House. And we don't expect the Senate to do exactly what we do, but hopefully we'll have a Senate now that will address entitlements, and let's see if the president's willing to sit down and work to make sure this country's on a fiscal footing. Because that crisis is coming. It's coming. It may come sooner, it may come later, we don't know. But there's going to be a day when China says, we're not going to buy your debt. We're not going to be able to pay our bills. And it's only because of the decision my generation has made. The baby boomer generation says, we're not willing to reform it for ourselves so our children can have a better future. And that doesn't get to my theme of a common hope. The final thing that I want to get to is this labor, and we need to deal with immigration. People say, why didn't you vote for the Senate bill? I didn't agree that the Senate bill is a good bill, quite honestly. It's a comprehensive bill. But why didn't we do our own comprehensive bill? We had a meeting on that because I know there are things that I think we can do. Border security, farm labor, we're talking about reforming that. We can do science and technology and engineers. But farm labor is always part of the discussion, what we want to do first. But the problem that we got into when we were talking about doing a comprehensive bill, we had people say, well, if we do border security first and whatever, what if the president just waives what we put into the law? So there wasn't a lot of faith to do a full comprehensive law because if we did that, the president would pick and choose what he's going to enforce. And it's only because we've seen him do it in the past. And you saw what he did just recently. And it makes it very difficult to address big issues and change law when you're not sure if the president's going to enforce it the way you intend for it to be done. And when you lose that sense of trust between the executive and legislative, it's very difficult for the legislature to go out and make big decisions and make big calls when you say, well, maybe he won't even do it the way that we think it should be done. And that puts our country in a pretty precarious situation, quite honestly, and something we all need to be concerned about. But we do need to address immigration. It can't just be seasonal farm labor. We understand not every farm has seasonal labor needs. Cows don't give milk only in the spring and the fall. We get that. And those are things we have to change and are dedicated to changing. And I think we can get some pieces of immigration legislation this year. Another thing we did is the Workforce Investment Act. I was involved in. I won't get into it. But it gives every business I go to, and you probably see this on your farms, every business I go to, if you have farm ag businesses, they said I would hire somebody today if I could find somebody with the right credentials. And so we've revamped the entire federal training program. A lot of people say I'd hire somebody today if they could pass the drug test. We have that problem too. And unfortunately, I think the General Assembly is going to do some things coming up to move forward. But those are important issues. But if we could do tax reform, unleash our energy, get EPA out of the way, we can do entitlement reform so we're not burdening our children. And the one thing is to get and rein in the agencies where they're their own, the agencies are writing their own laws, if you think about it. They're striking the word navigable out of the Clean Water Act. Congress debated that and put the word navigable in because they want an EPA to have unlimited jurisdiction. They've reinterpreted the word navigable so they can get unlimited jurisdiction against the wishes of Congress. And so what we're trying to do in that respect, so I won't get into that too much because Jeff talked about it, is establish that if you read the Constitution, we're the legislative branch. The president's supposed to faithfully enforce the law. Well, what happened? And it's self-policing. The president swears an oath to follow the Constitution, but what if he doesn't? Who's supposed to be, or he does it in the way he thinks he's doing it, we think he's not doing it right. How do you address that? And we think James Madison, the founder, said it should be the court system. So we are currently involved in a lawsuit. It was over Obamacare, a provision of Obamacare. We just added the immigration, but it would be very much in this navigable waterways that we don't have to go through the entire, have somebody that, right now somebody's got to be wronged, they got to go to court, and it's got to work its way over several years to the Supreme Court. That there are policies that are that important and questions that are that big that the legislative branch should be able to go to the court so that the courts make a decision quick and let them look at the president's immigration order. Did he really have, he had the authority to do deferred removal, but did he have the authority to do it for everybody, carte blanche, 5 million people at one time? I would argue that he didn't. I argue that repeals the law if you do that. And so those are the things that we're trying to do to get the courts involved at a quicker, there's nothing in the Constitution that says they can't come in and make a decision day one. And so that's what we're trying to move forward. So I think that if we get all these right, we can still create the wealth and the future and the betterment for our children. We can't continue to give them debt, but we need to give them a growing economy and growing jobs. I'm an optimist. When I was 16 years old, I bought a 4-cylinder Pinto with a racing stripe and spoiler. So if you have a 4-cylinder Pinto with a racing stripe, you're an optimist. And the spoiler, just in case, it's true, I have a picture of it. Just in case from 0 to 60 in 4 miles, they did some downforce. I was ready to go. But I am positive, and I've heard people quote Winston Churchill just recently. Winston Churchill used to say, he said, Americans do the right thing after they've tried everything else. So it's time to do the right thing. But my favorite Churchill, because it says about us, Churchill was half American. His wife was an American. I always tell my British friends that's why he was such a great prime minister. As a matter of fact, he came to the house and gave a speech, and he said, my dad was British, my mom was an American. If it had been the other way around, I'd probably gotten here on my own. But he spoke to the U.S. House right after Pearl Harbor. And he walked through, and people say, why? If you remember, none of you remember, but if you read the history, we were really kind of isolated, so we didn't want to get involved. Roosevelt was saying, we need to get involved in Europe. We really want to. So the Japanese thought, well, let's just take them out. Let's just wipe out so he goes through a long speech kind of described it. People think the Japanese were insane by waking this sleeping giant. They really thought, with our attitude as Americans and then what was going on, that they could wipe out our Pacific fleet. We would lose all of our ships and say, let's just have a settlement. You can have the Pacific, we'll just maintain our shores and be isolationists. But so he went through all that, and finally he looked up and he goes, what kind of people do they think we are? We're Americans. We're not going to tolerate people doing that to us. And we're Americans. We're not going to tolerate having China become the greatest economy, having people move forward. We're not going to tolerate that. So we are going to do the right thing. And I am optimistic about this country because there's policies that I laid out. If we do, we can continue to have. My great-grandfather could never imagine me being where I am. I want my great-grandchildren to be a place I cannot even fathom where they could be. And I'll close with this because my favorite quote I've ever heard in a speech anywhere, and it was the Prime Minister of Australia. She spoke to a joint session of Congress, and she must have been just a couple years older than me because I vaguely remember this, but I sort of do. But she says, when I was a little girl in Australia, this is what she said. She goes, what America means to my parents' generation is you saved us in the Pacific. That's what America means to my parents. This is what America means to me. That's what she said. When I was a little girl, we came home from school early, and I watched you land on the moon. And I'll never forget looking at my mom. I wish I could do the accent. Looking at my mother, and I said, Mom, those Americans can do anything. We can, and we will, and we're going to work hard. We got big gulfs to cross. We may not get across, but I guarantee you we're going to continue to move forward. And we're going to do the things to make sure this Commonwealth and this country continues to move forward, because it's that important for our kids and our grandchildren. Thank you.
Appreciate it.